Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic Examining Esoterica. Hey everybody, my good friend Jacob Fluharty is joining me again today. Jacob, I miss you when you're not around. Everybody needs breaks sometimes, but I like working with you because we're very much on the same wavelength. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back.
And I ask you back again for one of those terribly lighthearted subjects that you and I get into talking about on the podcast, which is forgiveness. Because forgiveness is at the root of spiritual enlightenment and one of the things that allows us to achieve ego death, taking a perspective outside of ourselves, the greater perspective, so that we can see how we are all connected and how people are all suffering from their own traumas and their own wounds. And this is a very easy thing to say in like a dispassionate manner. Like when it's easy to apply the concept of forgiveness, but when you get down to some of the things that people have to forgive, it becomes very, very challenging. And in fact, one of the reasons I started doing a lot of work on this, thinking about it, what it is, what it isn't, is that I kept having clients whose partners ended up going to jail for trying to kill them. And
Mhm.
it was really startling because, how do you approach forgiving somebody who you loved and trusted and had an intimate relationship with for trying to end your life? And here's the thing. What's forgiveness to you, Jacob? Before I even go into that, what does forgiveness mean to you?
I, I'm trying to remember because I'm pretty sure you're the one that said this to me at one point. But is what is it? Forgiveness is something about paying a debt, or
Hmm.
do you remember what I'm talking about?
I
This
do. I
you have to
do.
refresh me on this one. But I found it so profound at the time. But what asking someone to that they clearing a debt for someone that you have to pay, you have to tell me now.
Okay,
I'm gonna struggle
so
with.
here's what forgiveness is. And just for a second, it can help in the first stages of learning how to forgive what feels emotionally unforgivable. Is stop thinking about it as telling a person that something they did, something that they engaged in, a repeated behavior, an action taken, or a choice made, that something that they did is okay. Listen, we're simpatico,
Mhm.
everything's cool, I get it, we're forgiven. Instead, think of your life and your energy as an accounting sheet, and what you're remembering, as I told you, is look at it as a debt that you have on your books, but you know it cannot
Mhm.
be repaid. And so you just put a red
Mhm.
line through it and you forgive it, and it is off of your books. So it is the
Mhm.
release of an energy more than it is almost anything else. And it can be so
Mhm.
difficult to achieve, not simply because our egos get involved, it can be because simple matters of right and wrong. And does right and wrong exist? 100% right and wrong exists. It is not simply from a personal standpoint. It is actually wrong to seek to hurt those who have loved and trusted you on purpose, which is one of the things
Mhm.
that got me going down this road, is trying to help clients release the pain because it was holding them back in all other areas of their
Right.
life. And that's
Right,
really
and I
what
guess that's
it
what,
is.
yeah. That word release is, I guess, what I was most attuned to. Is just like that's what forgiveness is, just releasing that off of yourself, right? Because like you can carry around all this like nonsense that's just going to drag you down, like you said, right? So yes, a release.
It's a release of an energy. It is a relief of an energetic and an emotional burden as well. Because here's what we need to understand when we're talking about trying to forgive people. The act of you holding on to something does, unless that person is still in your life, it does almost nothing to that other person, but it does everything to
Mhm.
you. It impacts whether
Mhm.
or not you can see people as they are clearly, or whether or not you're seeing them through the lens of the damage that someone did to you. And when you're able to forgive, then your lens clears again and you see people with their faults, with their follies, but not as potential threats, because you will begin to trust yourself to never ignore the red flags that so many of us have in leading up to those
Sure.
terrible situations where we have to forgive. And you and I,
Right.
like one of the amusing things that happen, because what is forgiveness in all areas? Forgiveness, honest to goodness, is restoring your peace. Forgiveness does not
Mhm.
mean inclusion into your life. Meaning, if somebody did
Mhm.
you so dirty that
Mhm.
like 15,000 showers couldn't get the grime off your soul, then forgiving
Right.
it what it does means that you have peace again, but it does not mean you're inviting that person back into your life. When
Right. Mhm.
hilariously, is it okay if I tell the story of the puppy?
You can tell any of my stories. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so on the day that, because I was interviewing other people for the podcast, and I knew Jacob, like, it would be good to get a break from talking about the world's heaviest subjects with me every time we turned around. On the day that I was like, hey, I really miss working with Jacob, I'm going to text him and ask him if he's up for another podcast. What happened was you had to leave your dog home alone in his crate, and he's a puppy,
Mhm,
for
mhm.
basically the first time he was going to be alone for a period of time. And you were distraught over it. You felt so much for him that you went home at your lunch break only to discover that there had been a jailbreak and that
Mhm.
Hurricane
Huh.
Sterling had blown through many of your personal souvenirs and memento,
Uh-huh.
and there were few survivors among the
Yep.
things he touched.
Mhm,
And so I'm
mhm.
literally like, hey, you up for a podcast? And he sends me back a video of, oh my God, levels of
Carnage. Just
destruction in his
book
home. And I'm like,
book carnage everywhere.
it was
Yes.
terrible. And it was books and things that were like your childhood Bible and things that had
Right.
absolutely like emotional significance to you. And you sent that, and then you're like, sure, I'm up for it. What's the topic? And I'm like, forgiveness? Oddly enough.
Right, and so, I mean, I guess that's actually a really good story to tell because, like, it was as you're talking about all this other stuff, it's like, yeah, forgiveness, like, for me, I guess for, the crux of it is it's something for you personally, like, the dog, I think, is a good, step in for people in that my forgiveness of him affects him in no way. He's gonna keep doing whatever it is that he's doing, regardless of whether I forgave him or not.
Right.
The forgiveness was for me to not spend the rest of my day in just utter uh, anger and turmoil, right? And I feel like that's the same way with people, like I've forgiven, I would like to think, forgiven the last person who done me dirty, but my forgiveness didn't affect him at all. He is not changing his behaviors at all because of that. And I don't know. It was more for me than it was for him at all. And same way with the dog. I still love him. He's not going anywhere. But yeah, that radical forgiveness of him eating up half of my bookshelf was a fun experience and a fun lesson.
Yes, exactly, and it's a gift that you give to yourself when you forgive another. It's
Sure. Mhm.
also it's related to so many of in the Seven Energies podcast that we did, where we talked about what you need to achieve to basically like step into your spiritual evolution. Forgiveness is integral to multiple ones in there. One of them being humility, understanding that we are all equal. We will all have our struggles, and realistically, we all have to be forgiven for something. And like again, I'm always referring to like my 20s where I was stumbling around as an incredibly traumatized person. And by the way, a lot of my interactions and personal relationships reflected that. Now, did I ever do anything intentionally horribly? No, I didn't. But was I good at interpersonal relationships? No, I was an incredibly traumatized person who was struggling with
Mhm.
my own mental health after a
Mhm.
like abusive, for the record books type of childhood that also contained really good things. And one of the things that helped me with releasing those burdens was to understand that it's like, well, I can't ignore everything that went into making me, but I can release the anger, which I really felt in my 20s, by looking at, well, there were still good things. And then I got old enough that I was able to look at both of my parents and understand this was inevitable. This was inevitable.
Mhm.
Both
Sure.
came from
Yep.
such screwed up situations that it would have been nigh on a miracle if, like, they had been good parents. And
Sure.
then in my own turn, was I a great parent? No, I wasn't. I really struggled. Now, it wasn't anywhere near like compared to my parents, I was stellar. Compared to a really good parent, it's like, well, I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never even seen it. And so that
Yeah.
actually, it was. Uh, my poor son being the test pancake for my learning how to do things. And some of them I was good at, and some of them I wasn't. So you have to learn how to forgive
Right.
yourself. Forgiving yourself and forgiving others. One of the things, like the old saying of, hatred is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die, is actually true.
Right.
It is actually true. Holding on to resentment, holding on to anger, holding on to the slights of others against us, all it does is something to you. It does something to you. And even if that person is still in your life, like in the case of something like infidelity, if you're going to maintain that relationship, in order to ever have love and joy and connection and that feeling of resonant joy in that relationship, you have to be able to forgive an infidelity if you're choosing to stay in the relationship. And of course,
Hmm.
people, if they don't figure out why they cheated, will simply cheat again, because it's usually, again, an indication that they have trouble with intimacy or connection, or that they're having relationships for the wrong reasons to kind of patch up psychological holes within, which I have been guilty of that in my past, and so have you. So most codependent
Yeah.
people. If you have done things in relationships where you're like, that was not my proudest moment, it is not about like explaining it away. It's not an excuse. Forget about excuses. Think about reasons. If you didn't learn better, it's hard to do better. Here's the thing. How do you start forgiving? When we're talking about like being betrayed at the deepest levels, or like, how would I ever forgive my ex-husband for some of the things that went on? I knew that I couldn't initially. First, you have to heal. First, you have to heal so that you're not in active pain and trauma at all times. And if you can't achieve forgiveness, don't worry about it. It is the divine's job to forgive, it is your job to heal. And when you are healed, believe it or not, you will wake up one day and it won't matter very much. You will have released that energetic debt, and you will be able to move forward into, if you can't achieve forgiveness, I wish you well. Indifference is a great stand-in, honest to God, for forgiveness in the short term. And in the long term, it can evolve into the emotional inclusion of actual forgiveness. Now, for somebody who hurt me very badly, do I wish that particular person well? It's like I lose the ability to speak right there, because do I? Do I? I know that I have forgiven
No.
everything against me, and mostly I just handed it over to the divine, going like, I'm actually kind of worried about what it'll do to other people. So, like, why don't you take care of that, and I'm going to go on with my life. But I can also look
Right.
at that particular person as an understandable product of many of the circumstances that went into creating him, because perhaps he wasn't properly I'm not going to go into his stuff. We're going to talk in general terms. It can
Right.
occur because somebody never received the love that they needed either, and so they don't know how to give healthy love, and they don't know empathy, by the way, is a learned skill. We're not born these
Sure.
incredibly empathetic creatures. We have to be taught how to control our tempers, how to share, that other people have feelings that matter. If you had crap parents that did not teach you those lessons, those are things you have to acquire through your own study and skill and choice. Jacob, can we talk at all about what you just referred to about like what you're trying to forgive in somebody who's still doing it every time you
Oh,
turn around?
about the old homeboy K. Yeah, sure, we
Yeah.
can talk about that. Well, because it's a pretty good example. Because like that's why I like talking to you about this stuff, because you're a little bit farther along this acceptance journey than I am. I admittedly, because I think when we were texting, like it's like, oh, I have lots of thoughts, especially about like not forgiving people that don't deserve it. Like, what if I have a righteous anger that whatever. But of course, I'm playing into the talk that we're having. But yeah, we can use that as an example for sure.
You had been involved, and I'm going to I'm going to like give the little Cliff Notes version on it, and you can correct me on
Yeah.
anything. Jacob had been involved with somebody after the breakup of a long-term relationship in his life, and for him, it was a transference relationship or a rebound relationship,
Mhm.
which is the same thing. And the time period should have indicated that, but the person you got involved with was all in, all in, all
Mhm.
in, all in, and you were
Now,
not.
to be fair, I got caught up in that and kind of maybe or may not have love bombed. Like I'm totally at fault for that codependency kicked in real hard.
Exactly. And that's another thing that you can like, well, how did I contribute to this situation when we're talking about the
Mhm.
situation I was referring to? Can I see the ways in which I contributed to a situation? Absolutely 100%. In my own turn, because I had been so unsafe as a child and in an adult relationship, I just wanted to feel safe. I just wanted to feel safe because we actually need safety to grow. And did that create unfair burdens to him? Yes, I believe it did. And so it's like, is there something for him to forgive as well? Yes. Do I feel it is a great deal lesser? Yeah, I do. But like, that's from my perspective. In your case, you're trying to, again, look at the ways in which you contributed. So the relationship, because it was not standing on super healthy ground because you were not healed and therefore still a work in progress, ended. It was not a long term relationship, but you did briefly live together. And in the
Right.
aftermath, because he has been unable to, I guess, forgive you, he has taken multiple steps against you to present his version of you to people you are close to in your community,
Right.
to your friends, and it's not accurate information. And so
Right.
exactly, so there's a little bit of an "I'll show you" there in what he's doing.
Mhm.
How have you been coping with
Mhm.
that, and how in the world do you forgive it when I take it it's ongoing?
Yeah, so as far as the forgiveness aspect of it, I admittedly, I guess I don't think that I have. And the only reason that I say that is here recently, I have been, this sounds terrible, but been participating in a little bit of like Schadenfreude, because like people like that will torpedo their own lives when given enough time because the lack of responsibility and, all these different things. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And am I maybe taking a little bit of joy in watching, his life kind of fall apart? Yes, which is terrible. I shouldn't have that mindset. But at the same time, like eh, when things fell apart the first time, I was like done. I don't know how I'm ever going to get over this. I'm never going to talk to this person again. Blah blah blah. And I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to get over it. I'm going to invite this person back in. We're going to see if we can have some sort of friendship moving forward. And then the same patterns exhibited themselves again. And so I'm like, okay, well, the forgiveness was worthless. I guess now it's time to switch into divine fury or righteous fury, rather. And that's just kind of where I've been here lately. Like, I'm not actively doing anything against him, but at the same time, like, if an opportunity arises where I can contribute to the downfall, then, I've definitely had my hand in it. Um, so now I've got to come to this place currently where I'm like, okay, I don't need to actively seek for their downfall. I don't actively need to participate in it. So what do I need to do now in order to successfully move on to where he's not even like a consideration in my life anymore, to where I don't even care about what's happening? I don't know.
Um, here's and like I can speak to that from some of my own experience. Because initially, like I was like, I do forgive, because we have it tattooed into our souls and beaten into we're browbeaten with the idea of you must forgive in order to release that negative energy, in order to move forward, in order to reach for your highest self. And so initially, I had like this faux forgiveness thing, which happens in spiritual journeys, in which like I was like, well, we just weren't meant to be together. I wouldn't accept it. And I took a lot of responsibility for, but frankly, things that I shouldn't have been taking responsibility for. And then like stepped into anger for a couple of years. And as I realized, listen, this is only hurting me. This is affecting how,
Mm,
like, every man I encountered, I was like, are you a potential serial killer? I mean, it was almost that bad.
right,
Like
right.
I like
Hmm.
people would hit on me and I would start shaking and crying and literally run away. And that carried through up until about 4 months ago, where now I'm just a little awkward when somebody flirts with me. But I don't have a trauma response where I'm like it
Right.
literally taps into flight or fight, and I'm like, I've got to get away to like save my own butt. And
Hmm.
so what happened with that was starting to like, hey, I'm going to let myself off the hook for forgiveness. If you are struggling to forgive, the first step in forgiveness, this sounds counterintuitive, but it is not, is let yourself off the hook for not being able to forgive, and ask yourself, what am I really trying to heal? Because if I can't
Hmm.
forgive, it means that there's still a wound there. There either I'm still guarding against it or I'm still bleeding from it. And so in
Hmm.
my case, I just really leaned in on healing the old trauma that it had dug up, the new trauma that it had inflicted, and I just really focused on me, and I just didn't like ever look into what that person was doing. I never asked about what that person is doing. And
Hmm.
eventually it grew roots, and I realized somebody brought that person up to me, and because they'd crossed paths with him, and I genuinely was like, I don't care about hearing about him, just whatever.
Yeah, I
And,
need to get to that
and
place.
genuinely, it's this moment. It's like, do you care what happens? No, no, not really. And I realized that that was the perfect ground to build actual forgiveness from.
Right.
And that's when I started to be able to look at, well, I've healed the damage, I've healed the pain. Like I can connect with human beings again, which I couldn't for a while in the aftermath. I can connect with human beings again without like, having giant PTSD responses. So how can I understand what this person did as being more about them than about me?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
that's where people get hung up is they want like first of all, let me talk to you a tiny bit about closure. We crave closure so much. I want to
Yeah.
hear the
Mhm.
apology. I want to hear the reasoning. I want to have an explanation. Please understand, even if that person who has injured you and the thing that you are struggling to forgive were to sit down with you and present the reasons for why, unless they have undergone an entire healing journey themselves, they're not the real reason. It's the
Right. Yeah.
denial that we construct around the bad crap that we all do sometimes, because we all do it.
Yeah.
And the best thing that you can do is choose your own closure. And that's what I did.
Right.
I just
Yep.
started
Mhm.
reciting every day. I'm choosing closure. I'm letting this go. I'm closing that book. I'm closing out this debt. I am releasing this energy. I don't want any, and I would do cord cutting meditations and I would do spirit attachment recordings. And I still do those constantly. And again, didn't know that they had fully worked until somebody tried to like kind of give me some dirt on that person. I was like, no, just I'm better off not
Yes. Yes.
there.
They're working on that. Yep. Yep. Yep.
But
And then
yours is
also,
very
I think,
active. Yours is very
yeah,
active in a way that mine is not. Although, like, was I trash talked all over the place? Yes, but I feel for him on some levels because, like, pretty much everything that I know that he was saying about me, because it got back to me, like, doesn't fit with who I pretty obviously am. Like,
mhm,
he was depicting
right.
me as being incredibly mentally ill and unable to communicate with other people, and like, my trauma
Oh, geez, tell
responses
me about
were
it.
all
Yeah.
about my
Mhm.
own deep
Mhm.
damage, and then like I popped up all over YouTube, and it's like, well, I shouldn't see
Right.
it.
Right.
So that
And then I
that
think this also like, yeah, and I think it ties in as well as to something else that you said that I like a lot. Like the first time I tried to let this person back in is like forgiveness doesn't need to necessarily mean that you have a seat at my table anymore either. Like I'm allowed to forgive you and never speak to you again, right? But at first I was like, no, part of this forgiveness is that I let you back into my life and we try to like
form
rekindle
of
this
friendship.
friendship or whatever. But sometimes that's not possible, especially since again, the forgiveness is for us as the people doing the forgiving, not for the other person. My forgiveness did not change his behaviors at all, did not change his mindset, did not change, give him any impetus to work on his codependency or do anything better. And so again, I was still seeking this external like the story of my life, this external validation in the form of my forgiveness was great and allowed you to grow. Now we can be friends again. Well, that's not true. And it's never going to be true, probably with this individual. So that's where I had to realize, and I'm still working on, my forgiveness is not going to be allowing him back in. It's just going to be me finding a place where, like you said, someone can talk about him and I'm not immediately going to go into a 10-minute Q&A of like, oh, how was your experience? Oh, mine too. Yeah, let's sit here and talk trash about him for next 15 minutes.
The thing to remember with that is that when we're holding on to, because here's what happens, why people are like, some things not be forgiven. This is going to be like, listen to it all the way through, because when you are actively in pain, hearing that you must forgive it's
Mhm.
insulting to some people because they
Yes.
think
Mhm.
it's not recognizing the magnitude of the wrong or the injury done to them. Please
Right.
separate the idea that you must forgive has to do with the magnitude of the slight. It does not have to do with the slight and the terrible person and maybe the bad choices that they made and maybe the path that they will walk their whole life. It has to do with you being able to experience peace, love,
Mhm.
and joy in an unadulterated fashion. And that's why going towards forgiveness benefits you more than it does almost anybody else ever.
100%. Yep.
And here's the thing, we all have stuff we have to forgive ourselves for as well. And so that's another thing when you heal and you begin to understand yourself and you're less of a mystery to yourself. Because
Mhm.
again, that closure that we choose, when we understand that even if we sat down with somebody, unless they've done their work, they're never going to adequately be able to explain, well, listen, I think it's because I actually never
Mhm.
learned, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I had these terrible models, and I'm so sorry I repeated that behavior. And like that's usually the root cause of most things, but people rarely get to the point where they can see themselves with that much clarity because they're defending their own image of themselves within their own mind. Understanding that you don't need to do that. The past is actually gone. Whatever you've done in the past, you can change, you can grow, and you can be whoever you are
Right.
choosing to be. And that
Yep.
is, it's so powerful. Forgiveness gives you back your power because you're not at the end of anybody else's string. When somebody brings
Right.
that person up to you, and instead of wanting to be like, "Yeah, we should talk," huh? You're like, "Yeah,
Wow.
well, good luck. I'm done. I'm
And
full at this point."
and when you talk about like the closure aspect of it as well, like I think that that works in a way that like, so like I never need to have a sit down with my dad and like understand why, you know, the abuse happened, right?
Right.
I can look back. I did the forgiveness, and now I can understand why he was like that. He's not like that anymore, and we have a great relationship now as adults, and like it's beautiful. But like, I don't need to have the conversation with him. The forgiveness happened. I understood why that happened in that, you know, microcosm of the time period, and we can move forward now, and we have a great relationship now. Um, and that's way easier than forgiving yourself, but that's a whole different conversation.
It is, and like I'll talk a little bit about trying to forgive my mother, who's like one of the most poisonous narcissists to have ever lived, and like is one of those people who is, like presents herself as this, wonderful, kind, comparing, connected with the universe person, but like will take horrible shots at people when you're least expecting it. So being
Hmm.
around her was, it wasn't just walking on eggshells. The eggshells had mines underneath them, and
Yeah.
and it took me a long time to be able to look at her and understand, boy, something normalized a lot of violence in that person's life because she was like,
Mhm.
my parents were co-combative. So it was likely from her own home. And then I had to start looking at my grandmother's behaviors. My grandmother like made a mantle out of being sensitive. Everything was about her feeling. Of course, she was a narcissist. She was a raging narcissist, but she controlled absolutely everybody with her moods. If you took one's toe out of line, then you never knew when she was going to essentially have an episode that would last for days on end. Classic narcissistic abuse, which, my former partner was capable of that as well. And so, in fact, I was carrying forward a genetic energy. And when I
Mm.
realized that, I was able to look at my mother, who had a lot of similarities to my former partner, and understand, what happened is this is what you learned about how to cope with your feelings. Because that was how the nurturing experience around you, that's what it taught you, is that when you're feeling bad, when you're feeling angry, you take it out on somebody else. You make them hurt
Mhm.
too. And when I started to see her as simply like the thorny hothouse flower from the bad greenhouse, it really, really helped me to understand that essentially that describes everybody. Almost
Mhm.
everything that somebody does, it is rare for somebody to come out of an incredibly healthy. It does happen, by the way. So if you're like, "Oh no, I have," I bet you do. I bet you do have proof of that because it does happen. It is not as common as people who simply did not learn how to have a good relationship with themselves because they were surrounded by people who had terrible relationships with self, so they couldn't teach a good relationship with self. And that's
Right.
generational trauma, quite frequently related to generational curses. And generational curses are always my favorite because all it takes is awareness to start breaking it down, being able to look within, being able to understand we're not some great big mystery. Usually, we're a cake that is made out of iffy ingredients, and all you have to do is start breaking yourself down, going backwards,
Mm.
start from the fundamentals again, and put yourself back together in a sturdy and a welcome shape rather than one that's cobbled together through poor coping mechanisms that we usually all learn. And sometimes people will just be, motivated by greed or selfishness or the desire to hurt others, which sadism does exist in other people as
Mhm.
well. And how do you forgive that? Again, you stop making it about the other person and you start making it about your own peace, your own journey,
Right.
and your own
Mhm. Yeah.
happiness.
And I think that's why you like we want to like roll this back into the tarot work that you and I do, and I feel like this is very it's my gosh, 90% of what I'm doing basically is like helping people, and a lot of it is through like generational trauma, and like so that's why I like you and I get along so well. I think, and the way that we approach reading is that that's my main goal in all of this, right? It's not to like talk about other people per se, which is why sometimes I really dislike the whole like, how does he feel about me? Blah blah blah. I'm more interested in like how do you feel about you? How do you feel about the situation? Because I feel like you're gonna get to that answer that you're asking, but you're not gonna get there the way that you want to. I don't know. I'm gonna take you on a side road to get to that final conclusion. Um,
Until
s-
we heal what's within us, our outcomes are predictably the same over and over again because we haven't changed
sure.
anything. And
Hmm.
tarot can be used to help you understand yourself and why you do the things that you do. Because when I'm talking about how you can't look to another person for closure and have it really mean anything, remember that you have something within you that you are also like, I haven't ever really looked at the real reasons. I'm just going through this life in survival mode. Stop and look at
Hmm.
yourself, not to berate yourself, but to give yourself the kindness, the compassion, and the love that it takes to become the version of yourself you wish to be. And as you step into that, if like you really have something just heinous that you cannot forgive, and I am not disputing that. I am not disputing
Hmm.
that. When I've been talking to people who like I can't go into this hyper specifics of things because that's other people's stuff. So please just trust me.
Right.
Some of the stories I've heard, it's like no one in their right mind could ever blame you for still being angry, upset, outraged, and with true righteousness, angry. But here's what I know:
Right.
been through a ton of crap, and you deserve to feel better regardless. And the only path to accepting what others have done is to first accept ourselves, heal ourselves, become strong and sturdy and in flow and in understanding of self so that when things come up, we can handle it. I don't even want to go into everything that went wrong in my day yesterday, but it
Hmm.
sucked from start to I went to bed at 9:30 at night to get the day over with. It was that
Oh,
type of
yeah.
day. But I will tell you throughout the course of that, literally if I touched it, it turned to fertilizer day. I was able to handle it in a much better manner than I would have 4 short years ago or 2 short years ago because I was able to view it as something that would pass. When you learn to
Sure.
let go, which is what forgiveness is, letting go, getting something off your books,
Hmm.
it becomes easier in the day to day to let go of the small things. And we get very trite about it. Like, don't sweat the small things. Yes, it's all small things. Hey, listen, those are the building blocks of your life. Don't be dismissive towards other people's pain. If they're struggling with
Right.
something, there's a reason. So look at what that person is going through and recommend that they heal. Honest to goodness, the key to the kingdom that will make you happier lies first in healing. And we all have to heal something. And it's never a contest. It's never ever a contest. Everyone has only been through what they've been through. And even something that might sound, with some of the stuff you and I have been through, might sound minuscule to either of us. That was a big damn deal to that person. And it was part of their
Yeah.
experience. And it doesn't, like I said, when it comes to trauma, trauma's trauma. It's something that
Yeah.
changes your
They don't give out gold medals for trauma, right? Like we're all in this together.
where nobody's going to win. Like, honest to goodness, when I talk about my bum childhood, I have met people where it's like, I don't know how you're not a serial killer because, like, it's like, honest to goodness, it would, induce that much rage and pain. So, outside, when you're struggling with something that is so unforgivable that it affects how you approach the world, please understand when I am saying your key to happiness is forgiveness. It has nothing to do with the rightness, the wrongness, or the horror of that situation. That is undisputed. It is terrible. I've heard stories that I'm surprised to still have any hair on my head. They have been that bad and they've been true. And how do people keep moving on? By healing within, by focusing on self and self love and understanding we can never control another person because we never truly, truly know another person. Half of the people we meet don't truly know themselves. So it's very difficult to truly know another person. And that we are all capable of doing things that of which, like we would be terribly ashamed if we were presented with them as like someday you're going to steal a grandmother's purse to feed your family, and like someone would be like, I would never do that. Hey, if you were starving and your family was starving, you'd do that. You probably would do that because we are only ever performing at the level of safety that surrounds us. Desperate people do desperate things, injured
Hmm.
people do injurious things, and
Yep.
understanding that forgiveness is for you so that you can have joy and happiness. And again, that feeling of being part of something rather than excluded from something. And if you're hearing this and you're in so much pain, honest to goodness, stop putting any pressure on yourself to make it about the word forgiveness, which is a loaded term. Is a loaded term, and it is wielded by, again, the power structures of religion as the proof of whether or not you're a good or bad person. It has nothing to do with being a good or a bad person. Do you want to be a healthy person? If you
Hmm.
want to be a healthy person, then what you need to do is stop making it about the act and start making it about, how do I heal this injury? And if your healing is dependent on what another person does, it's going to take you a really long time because you can't control what they do.
Yep. Hmm. Yep.
But
Yep. Yep.
you can control what you do. Now, specifically, some of the things that in your community, some of the things that your former partner has done have been to undercut and undermine your character. And how have you dealt with that?
Um, luckily that part for me wasn't super difficult just because like I'm pretty outgoing and charismatic, and so I have a pretty large friend group, which is something that this person never really had. And so I think that that was the main one of their main goals, in whether they realized it or not, and doing what they were doing was undermining the thing that they were always jealous of about me in the first place. And so luckily I spent a lot of time with my community, as it were. And so these people know me fairly darn well at this point. They've seen me in all different kinds of states. And so if I were going to be a terrible person, they would have seen that about me at this stage over the past 3 years. And so for me, it was just basically I just had to stand in my truth and realize that like even though he was saying those things about me, I didn't have to defend myself so much because for me it would have looked like what was I trying to fight against so much? Like why did I feel the need to explain why this was wrong? Well, I didn't have to explain anything. I just kept living my life. And then if as you're friends with me, you'll see that these things are not true. I ran into it with a mutual of ours. He had a very warped idea of who I was based on his interactions with my ex, and then once we got to talking, we came to, and similar on my end too. I had these same kind of reservations about hanging out with him. But once we started talking and sharing our stories and hanging out and seeing who each other were in reality, it became very clear. It was like, oh, well, you know, I don't know. I've never had to really explain myself because I just had to live. And then once people saw me living, they're like, oh, you're not all of those things that I was told about you, right? Like, I don't know. So that was my best weapon, was just like I didn't have to like just not fighting, just kind of letting things happen. And it's like I am who I am, and you either accept it or not, and or you either see I hate to use it. It seems so loaded to say the word lies, but they were. You see the lies that you were told, or you continue to believe them. And there's nothing I can do to change that. It's certainly not going to be any hair off my back if you don't. But at the same time, I would like to be perceived as I really am, but unfortunately, can't always change other people's perceptions. But all I did was just kept being me, and luckily that was enough in my situation to kind of diffuse the negativity as it.
Well, and they were lies, and like when we're skating around this because like we're not here to like set anybody on fire or burn them in
Mhm.
effigy. So like we're skating around some of the specifics of it, but they were the type of lies where it's like, dude.
Right, yeah, like, I'm not a meth user, I don't hit my dog, I don't like, these are all kinds of like, these are the kind of, so everyone who listening understands, like, these are the gravity of the situations that were being levied against me, and I was just like, none of this is true. But whenever you hear that about somebody, your first thought is going to be to believe it, because why would somebody say something so outlandish if it weren't true, right? And then I would have people come over to my house and see me interact with my dog even when he's just being awful, and they're like, well, that's not how I expected this to go. And I was like, yeah, because I'm actually not a bad person. So yeah, I don't know.
And you posed something that I kind of want to answer. Why would a person do that? Here's why: to justify their feelings of anger and resentment and their own actions. And that is
Hmm.
why
Yeah.
sometimes people will either spin outlandish tales or take something small and blow it way out of proportion, again, to justify what they did. And have we all done things like that? Oh, probably. Like, for real. Like, sometimes we forget that, like, our perception, while valid, is not the universal truth of a situation, and the other person has their
Hmm.
own perception. And from his perception, even though the tools he has used in trying to right what he feels is his personal wrong, is he believed that he was misled in your intentions and in how you felt about him, and that he's still trying to take it out on you. That I
Hmm.
I'll show you, you'll be sorry, I'll make you sorry, that type of stuff. And again, trying to make sure that you felt as isolated and hurt in the aftermath as he did. And so, like,
Hmm.
the whys are like when you start looking at other people and what they have done, not about what are you trying to do to me, but it's like, what are you running from in you? What are you running
Yeah.
from in you? And and you can start to take a greater perspective, and taking the greater perspective and trying to see the, kind of stepping outside and stepping outside and stepping outside until you can see the greater picture of who a person is and what went into forming them. Then that often sets you free from many of the burdens, because it's not about you any longer. When you
Hmm.
understand that half of the stuff someone has done to you, while it may have injured you, it's actually its origin point comes from that particular person's need to defend their own actions with their own mind, in their own mind, and denial among them. Because realistically, again, you were right out of a long-term relationship, and the level of investment that this person had in you, I'm not denigrating him. There's some great things about this person, but the level of investment he
Right.
had in you was not even logically sound. It was like, to know anything about the psychological construction of relationships, because if you did, you'd understand what just happened was inevitable. It was inevitable.
Yeah.
Most people, I did not have a rebound relationship. I actually just have chosen to remain single until I feel that I'm healed. And like, that's what I encourage other people to do. But most people will
Yes.
go
Mhm.
towards the next relationship because it's difficult to be alone with yourself when you're in pain, you know?
Yeah, no, was just having this talk the other day. It was really weird going from, a 10-year relationship to 0, right? And I was especially hurt because, like, my as longtime listeners will know, I am polyamorous, and so me and my husband, we had another partner. And so when I left, I wasn't just losing my 10-year,
Yeah.
relationship with my husband, I was losing that other relationship as well. And then I was by myself, they were together. I was not processing anything well at all. And so, yeah, that transference felt really great. And then instead of like doing my own work, realizing where I was wrong, forgiving the two of them for my perceived slights. I'm not saying they did anything wrong, but my perceived slights that they had, levied against me. I just transferred all of that energy into a new relationship that progressed way too quickly. And unfortunately, I found someone that was more than happy to allow that rapid progression, because they too had always felt like their worth was based around being loved and in a romantic relationship. And so, yeah, there was never any forgiveness work for myself or for my exes. And so then I jumped into this relationship and no work ever get done there. And so, yeah, it took me, I was very stunted in my journey, my forgiveness journey there, because I didn't want to deal with it. So I just kept transferring.
Well, and and transference, by the way, is an absolutely normal thing, and it can actually be a fairly healthy thing, because most of the things that we think about with rationalization and denial and transference, they are protective constructs within our psyche. When you're not like ready to cope with something, you will do something to delay it. And a lot of
Hmm.
people who have those rebound or transference relationships are doing so because they're usually attracted to the same type of relationship dynamic that they've just left. And it allows them to work out those issues, not simply within, but also without, so that they get feedback on that. And usually the implosion of a rebound relationship, which they almost always implode. And that is not to judge you if you're in a rebound relationship, and maybe you won't. Remember, these are generalizations, and there will always
Right.
be exceptions. There will always be
Mhm.
exceptions. So if you're like, how dare you? This is not like, it's not, I'm not trying to dare anything. I'm telling you, if you're one of those exceptions, fantastic. Generally speaking, most rebound relationships will implode because instead of being about having the relationship, they're about dealing with the energy and the issues that are being carried forward from the damage done within the prior relationship. And it's normal, but it's also a good idea to recognize, if I skip this step and instead do my inner work, then I will be repairing it not just for that relationship dynamic, but for my entire self, my whole self, my higher self, to connect to being fully integrated with your higher self and being in balance with the universe and being in flow. And that is another one of the reasons. And by the way, if you're hearing this and you're like, I don't want to forgive, I don't want to forgive because it feels like if you forgive somebody, that it's the same as letting them off the hook for something.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And it's not. It's not.
Yep.
Remember, we're not the ones holding anyone on or off a hook. That
Hmm.
is karma, and what we do does return to us. Try to do good in this world and go forward. And in the whole, like what you do comes back to you, it will. You do not need to hold on to a slight, an injury, or even an outrage. Because again, the stuff I'm not saying about what I've encountered in my clients and what has happened to them can include things that I would have to trigger warning the heck out of this podcast in order to include it. It is truly horrific stuff in some instances. You will never have to hold them on the hook because their karma and the energy that they have created will do so. But particularly people who've been through horrific circumstances, you deserve to be free of that pain. So go towards, I'm not going to worry about forgiveness. First, I will worry about healing. And instead of forgiveness, I'm going to try to achieve indifference towards that person. Because when you no longer care and you're no longer fueled by resentment and feeling like it's almost a validation of self sometimes to remain angry. Like if we forgive, we're like, well, I guess it wasn't that big a deal. Listen, hey, something can be the biggest darn deal in the entire world and you can still let it go and get over it. And why do you want to do that? Because you deserve to live in the present in an ever expanding and joyful experience for the future. And that's what it's about. Stop making your life about somebody else's wrong against you and make it about your own healing, your own ability to love, your own ability to, and you know what they say, living well is the best revenge. Don't
Yeah.
worry about what will happen to that person. What is meant for them will come to them, and they will either learn the lessons that they need to in this life or they will continue to come back. And there is a theory, by the way, that all that ever happens when somebody dies, when they haven't like changed those timelines and created a new timeline, is you just start this life all over again. Is that one true? I hope not. Although if it is, man, am I ever doubling down on healing because it's like, oh no, I do
Yeah.
no,
Right.
I'm not going on that cruise again if I can possibly
Yeah.
help.
No, thank you. Yeah. No, no, no. I don't
um,
want to do this ever again.
and
Jeez.
how do you find tarot to help start taking those layers back and revealing to people? Because when we're talking about the protective constructs of rationalization and defensiveness and sometimes transference, the way to start doing that is gently. Like you think about opening someone's eyes like you're opening up the blinds on a super sunny day. Do it by degrees so that just enough light starts to seek in so that they can see what is most important. And sooner or later, all of the light can come in and you can see the entire picture. But you have to do it by
Mhm.
degrees. Be gentle with yourself when you're trying to heal. Stop trying to, and by the way, don't think of it as a contest. When we talk about spiritual enlightenment and evolution, it's not like a promotional thing within a pyramid scheme. It is only and solely about your spiritual and your emotional well-being. And when you achieve your emotional well-being, you can find so much more joy in this life. And the things that happen to us, while bad, can also be part of like, well, now I see it as a lesson. Like three of the things that happened yesterday were just like, it was like one of them was extremely emotionally painful. And I cried my eyes out and then I was over it by the nighttime. And that is progress for me because I've always repressed my feelings, because when you grow up around highly reactionary people and then marry highly reactionary people, like you learn to repress your feelings so that you're not even aware of what's going on, and that the whole responding not reacting, like half of what happened yesterday taught me that I've made a lot of progress in responding to my feelings with the appropriate care, which is what responding and reacting is really about. When you understand the emotions that you're having, you can respond to them with the appropriate actions to make yourself feel better and let it go more easily. So that's another reason to go towards forgiveness. And again, I beg of you to hear this part. When you're talking about forgiving someone, it does nothing to them and it does everything to you when that person is out of your life. If they're still in your life, listen, we're talking about a different magnitude of wrong. We just are, because the things that people really, really, really struggle with are these very difficult, like, assaults in some cases, or attempted murders, or like, blatant theft, or like absolute deceit, or like, acting in a way that is designed to be emotionally abusive towards a former partner, like in the case, because that's what's really going on with your former partner, is he's trying to upset you at every turn. He's trying to make sure that he can spoil your day in as many ways as he can because he's still in pain, because he hasn't healed his own stuff. And again, like, I read for you and I have a pretty good sense of this person. There's a good human being in there. He's better than this.
Mhm.
He can heal and be a much better and happier human being. And that's really the key. Like, he'd benefit from stop not making it about, I will feel better when I feel like he's paid, and rather, I will feel better when I have healed so that you no longer have any tie to me. You no longer have any power over me. And I no longer carry the wound that I perceive that you inflicted upon me. And that
Mhm.
is freedom. And that is freedom. That's also the thing that will allow you to have the best experience, because like today is a different day from yesterday. And like I get to move forward in a free and a clear energy because of all of that work I did. Because in learning how to forgive others, and like even people, like when I'm specifically talking about my parents, because they were really bad parents, guys. Like they were really, really bad parents. But they weren't terrible human beings. And eventually I was able, like, not overall, like people can be more than one thing. There's a lot of dichotomy in people. Like the very fact that I can talk about like my mother being a very, very poisonous narcissist, like she can also be a really good human being. Like she went and taught adult literacy. At like there are many
Mhm.
people who they would hear her name and she's the reason they learned how to read and became citizens. And so, like, we are different things to different people. And learning to see that part of her as being as valid as the hideous part, and not excusing it away, but as actually being the best part of her, that she simply never figured out how to be that person 24/7. Because it's not a put on. Like there's a decent human being in there, but she was so damaged by her nurturing experience that she became incredibly, incredibly damaging. And she really did learn from her mother that when you have even you're the slightest bit peevish, you take it out on the person right in front of you. And in my case, I was a little teeny kid, and it
Mhm.
was really because she wasn't around me much after the age of 6. And then again, I had to go and live with her after my father died, so I was back with her at the age of, like, 16, like, freshly traumatized by all sorts of new things, and she was just as bad then, even worse, because 'cause I'm something of a rebel. It's really hard to tell me what to do, but I was never a destructive one. It's just like, "Good luck." I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, and, accepting that part of myself as being an understandable part of my nurturance also helped me forgive self. And that's another thing. Healing will allow you to forgive yourself, because we all look at our, like, whatever it is that brought that person into our lives as like, why did I do that? I'm obviously not talking about you're walking down the street and accosted by a complete stranger and something terrible happens. Like the only way in which you played a part in that is like time and circumstances and the choices that leading up to that, but that's not an issue of blame. In most of the instances of difficulty forgiving, what I'm talking about is people that we trusted who then hurt us. And the magnitude of the slight and the injury can vary greatly, and the lastingness of that pain and that trauma are all addressed best with healing. So when you're reading cards and how do you guide somebody towards healing?
What I try to remind people is that the story that unfolds in front of us is, when I'm reading, at least the majority of the time, is telling a story. It's telling your story, And there's probably going to be elements that you're not expecting, right? Because the cards are going to tell us the things that we need to know, not necessarily the things that we want to know, right? And since my guides understand the way that I approach the topic of reading and all that stuff, I am a little bit more likely to want to talk about things that have to do with you personally, maybe not the situation, but that all comes in together, right? So, like, there may be something about yourself that you need to be looking at or working on, and they'll like sneak in that card there in the middle somewhere, being like, this. But oh, then there's this thing that's really important, and it has nothing to do with the question per se in the short term. But if we can work on this aspect of who we are, who you are, then that will allow like growth and movement on the topic as a whole. So I always tell my people, just like, be ready for a lot of introspection and a lot of questions in that vein, because I find that when we work on those kinds of I don't want to use the word issues, but when we work on those topics or whatever, oftentimes the client is able to then come to their own understanding and answer their own questions, I guess, most of the time. Which is, I feel like most of the time, that's all I'm really there for, is just to help guide someone to the answer that they already knew, through introspection and, growth along the way.
Well, that's true. We really do have our answers within, but we put up blinders around the things and, like, again, open those blinds as is appropriate. One of the things that I found with tarot, and like it may be particular to me, I'm not sure if everybody can do it. I found that I used an extended Celtic cross that, like, basically, like, I can't say I designed it. It came to me. It just works really well to have a psychological window into people. Is I found that the cards would tell me about what was coming up, but they would also, in the exact same draw, be telling me about the present day, and in the exact same draw, contain the past. And
Hmm.
if you look at them for not just what's coming up, but since the past informs our choices in the present, which shapes our future, look at them for what they're indicating about that person's past. Because until we make
Hmm.
changes and until we heal, we are essentially repeating an energy signature, almost like a radio signature, and it carries the same information until we alter that signature through healing. And so that's why the
Uh-huh.
past is in the cards as well. You can still
Right.
speak because we repeat cycles until we break them. And so that's like for all my fellow readers out there, for people who are reading for themselves, that's my tip on the cards is remember every draw you put down, because people do repeat things in a cyclical fashion. It contains the energy and the answers about the past. And if you look at the cards about the past, then you are giving people the window into why do I do the things I do? Why do I make the choices I make? Why do I date the people I date? Why do I marry the people I marry? Why me? It's in your past. It's in your
Right.
formative experience. Because in the nature versus nurture department, your nature matters. And some people, like, they don't have, like, we have to acknowledge, by the way, when we're talking about forgiveness and why forgiveness does not always mean inclusion, is not everybody comes here with any investment in the idea of light or dark or love or dark, of any of the good or bad type of things. Some people are just in it for themselves and to have a hedonistic experience, and that's the path that they're choosing. And they're not guided by ethical, moral principles. They're not, and that's a choice that they get to make because that's why we have free will. But that is why forgiveness does not necessarily merit inclusion, and it has to be on a case by case basis. But please remember that when you understand yourself, you will no longer be mystified by the impulses that we undertake to protect the damage that we have yet to heal. Because that is usually what's at the root of the choices that we make that are not in the service of our most expedient evolution, where we're talking about rebound relationships or transference.
Hmm.
Like really, really briefly, like transference, emotional transference plays such a giant role in the trauma that we have not healed, and it's so normal. And what we need to understand is you're not talking about having a weak character. If you've experienced any of these, it means that you're injured. If somebody came along and broke your leg in 15 places with a hammer, you would understand I'm probably going to limp for a while. It's going to take a while to rehabilitate. That was a bad break. First, there was the setting, then there was, like, you'd understand that there was a process. Your emotional construction works in exactly the same way. If somebody came along and made sure that your response to loving what are supposed to be safe and loving relationships are like to be constantly defensive or looking for a part of yourself that you were never given, which is what happens in codependent relationships, is that people do not have a strong sense of self or self-worth because it was never imparted to them. They were never told that they were
Yeah.
good and they were smart and how to view themselves as their best friend and somebody who's always trying to help them achieve the best that they can. And that's where you start. That's where you start, is learning how to talk to. If you will not say it to your best friend, do not say it to you. If you say unkind things to your best friend, then please stop. It's counterproductive. And learn how to speak to yourself kindly, because everything flourishes with kindness. And it genuinely, it will help you grow. Start from a place of being kind to yourself and being kind to others. And we talk about being kind to yourself. You know that whenever you read for me, because Jacob's the guy who can read for me, and God bless you for trying to deal with my spirit guides, because they are tough mother, you know what's. They are, like, I'm convinced half of them are Marines. I really am, because if you don't, I'm on a need to know basis. But whenever we're dealing with, I'm trying to think if that's the right way to say this. It's not. And so I'm going to switch tactics on that really carefully. Like my guides who I'm like, always trying to like skirt around, were like, nope, nope, not the time, not the time. It's like, okay, I'll just switch tactics on that. So start from a place of self-compassion and self-love, and understanding that your guides are always there to try and guide you to the best outcomes with the choices you've made. One of the first things to
Mhm.
understand if you're at the beginning of a healing journey is, I swear to you, the universe is not doing anything to you. It can try and guide you towards the best outcomes available to you through the options that are available within reality to make the best choices to continue to rise. But the only time that the universe could ever be accused of doing something to somebody is, your soul came here to learn the lessons of, let's use patience as an example, because that's the one I've struggled with my whole life. And until such time as you learn how to have the appropriate emotionally healthy response, they will bring you things to frustrate you because it's a lesson you asked to learn and something that will guide and enable your empowerment. And so that's the
Yeah.
only time, but like, they're not trying to drive you insane. They're trying to help you learn something. And that most of the things that happen in our lives are about the other people having free will and our guides only being able to run interference at so deep of a level. And that this is a learning experience. And one of the things we have to learn how to deal with is pain and frustration and sometimes anger, and sometimes people that we once trusted behaving in a manner that suggests, is like, how blind was I? Because we've always been there. We've all been there on that thing where it's like, in the aftermath, it's like, I don't even recognize you as a human being. We see things as we are. If you do not possess something dark, it is very difficult for you to perceive darkness. And a lot of the times when
Mhm.
people are struggling to forgive, it is because they are having difficulty with that aspect as well, is forgiving themselves for the ways in which they may or may not have participated in the circumstances that led to them being injured, which is not the same thing as you are responsible for somebody injuring you or abusing you or attempting to kill you, which has happened, like I said, to my clients. It started to really like, why am I attracting all these people who, is it that common? It's because I deal with people with such deep trauma. It is because there is a part of you that has to look at them, because when you start looking at yourself, all you can see is your pain. And accepting that there is some pain in life, but as soon as you start going towards, if I deal with it, if I cope with it, if I look at it, if I examine it, if I heal it to the best extent that I can, the pain that I feel will not be gone. Like, yesterday was a painful day, but it was fleeting. It will not be carried forward day after day after day, because I've learned so much about, like, this too shall pass. All those trite phrases actually have a lot of wisdom within them if we stop using them as a like code for shut up. Because that's what this too shall
Right.
pass is often. And like, or count your blessings. Count your blessings, examine your life for gratitude, and you will change the energy that you're in, and you'll look at your life with an eye of like, it's not so bad. There's a lot of cool stuff here. I'm enjoying this. And then also just kind of trying to process things in a way that is productive can help as well. But there will be pain sometimes in healing journey. And you and I are always talking about that, is that we wish that people would talk about that in a spiritual community. And if you rush towards forgiveness, then what happens is there is that repressed trauma and it's likely to come out with triggers. And so that is why
Mhm.
healing is the best thing that you can do if you're prone to triggers, if you're prone to being triggered into emotionally disproportionate responses because of the unhealed trauma underneath. The way to start going towards healing that pain is in the idea of release, forgiveness being anything about what that person did, and more about, like, you know what? I simply deserve to feel better than this. So I'm going to heal myself and I am largely indifferent to you. And then when you're healed, sometimes the things will be bad enough that you will still remain indifferent to that person and simply handing over the line. But sometimes you will see simply a wounded person and their actions being understandable because of the wounds that you understand about them and about yourself. And like when it comes to, it's really easy for me to like forgive the person who's hurting you, but like I said, it's an understandable thing from someone who has always felt excluded by others to try and make sure that you too feel excluded, even if he has to make up stuff.
Right.
Understandable that he's acting from his own place. It's not fair, it's not right, and your character is what will carry you through, and you being actually known and authentic to the people around you is what carries you through that. But like looking at what he's doing, yeah, he doesn't deserve a place in your life because of the actions he's undertaken, but he is an understandable human being, and trying to have compassion for like somebody who always felt like they never got invited to sit at the lunch table with others, feeling like I'm going to take away your lunch table and that'll show you. That's a little bit like
Right.
what motivation is. So, any closing thoughts on forgiveness, Jacob?
No, other than what I feel like I said most weeks is nope. Just be kind to yourself. Give yourself space to have your journey. Like it's never easy, but it's always worth it. Another one of those trite phrases, but I stand by it.
And always check the latch on the puppy crate.
And always, for God's sake, please check the latches on your dog
If you
crate.
learn nothing else from us today, learn this. Protect your books, check your latches. This has been Logical Magic, examining esoterica. I am Alane. You can find me at therisingmoon.com. Book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session. My YouTube channel is Cronecast at The Rising Moon. I've been joined today by my friend Jacob Fluharty, who is just like the best sport about talking about the heaviest subjects. And you can find him at Southern Style Readings on Facebook, or Southern Style Readings at gmail.com. Hit him up. He's a great reader. He can help you understand what you're feeling. And when you understand what you're feeling, you have power over yourself. When you have power over yourself, you know what you have? Control over your outcomes in a way that you never had before. And it's a much more empowering form of tarot. Instead of telling you what will happen, you start to learn how to heal, and what you can make happen becomes possible. Take care. Be well. Live magically. Whee!